Did you receive notice that your in-class course is now online? I've been involved in teaching and designing online graduate level courses for over 10 years now. I've created this presentation to share some ideas for getting your lecture material online, but also to help you think through student engagement and evaluation more broadly. I hope it helps you on your journey. I touched briefly on courses that were designed from the start to be delivered online, but only as they help in the current context of having to very quickly transition courses across entire institutions from in-class to online. I propose various strategies to replace lectures, opportunities for discussion, and considerations for evaluations. I provide a few example courses and potential samples of a week online. I end with some common challenges, tips, and strategies for a smooth transition. Finally, recognizing everyone's situation is unique, I provide a few bells and whistles options, which can be implemented with very little extra effort, or maybe just an idea for the future. Universities have been dabbling or embracing online teaching for over 10 years now. There are endless resources and courses online to help an instructor design an online course and to teach in the online environment. Universities also have dedicated departments or teams to support online teaching and learning. Online courses started, in many cases, as a direct translation of a course to an online platform. However, now you'll find a huge range of approaches to online course design, facilitated in part by developments of software and technology. We also better understand the opportunities and challenges experienced for both online teachers and learners. The MOOCs, massive open online courses, are a great case example. You may be thinking, yeah, I haven't heard about those lately. Recent events have put pressure on many to transition courses online abruptly. Our experience online teaching has identified some components necessary for success. However, of course, the current environment may add some additional challenges and strategies. The online environment accentuates the need for instructors to be organized and detail-oriented. For example, broken links can be extremely frustrating for students. And in part because of the lack of familiarity with online courses, but also because of additional risks in a fully online environment, it's even more important to set clear expectations. Expectations that instructors have of students, but also what expectations students can have of the instructors. Probably my strongest recommendation for online courses is the integration of regular and frequent assessments. Successful courses have multiple methods of engagement with the material, with other students, and with instructors. And lastly, it can seem like a course is going smoothly. Students are posting and asking good questions in office hours, but the online environment makes it easier for students to fall through the cracks. It takes dedication to an active process to help identify students who are struggling or disengaged before it's too late. While we've made great progress in designing and running successful and rewarding online courses, these aren't done with days' notice. So it's important to draw on the infrastructure and lessons learned over the last 10 to 15 years, but be realistic in terms of the time, resources, and support that you have available to identify feasible next steps for you and your students to finish your semester. Context-specific considerations include what software does your institution or department have a license for already, what institutional supports are in place for instructors and learners to set up new systems or problem solve, does your course have TAs, does your textbook have digital resources that could be helpful, and for courses with multiple instructors or significant overlap with other courses, what are the opportunities to share the work and created resources? Lastly, it may be important to consider accessibility requirements. How these will be applied or addressed in this current context may vary, but it's important to at least be aware of accessibility standards and requirements. For example, in Ontario, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act and associated standards apply to most or all materials posted online. Another really important contextual factor is your personal capacity at this time. Are you just in survival mode, or do you have the time and readiness to see this as a bit of an opportunity to try out ideas that you may be toying with already? Wherever you are on this continuum, it is totally understandable. Be kind to yourself. I'm going to focus most specifically on options for sharing your lecture material, for facilitating discussions and answering questions, and evaluations. For lecture material, I review 3 options: live lecture broadcast, pre-recording and posting videos, and curation of existing materials. Discussions I introduce both synchronous, where everyone is participating at the same time, and asynchronous options. I also touch on evaluations, which are a source of concern as announcements canceling in-class exams are coming out. And while the tendency may be to put this off, it may be desirable to split up those grades, if possible, to more assessment opportunities spread over the remainder of the term. Using the integrated quiz tool in your learning management system, or LMS, using integrated assignment submissions, and exploring new assessment opportunities that emerge in this context. Lectures can be delivered on the same schedule but online. I put this option first, but it's not my recommendation for many circumstances. It superficially seems to be the easiest and thus logical option. It would allow instructors and students to keep the same schedule, and for those classes that take attendance, it makes this relatively easy. However, especially for large classes, there is significant risk of technological challenges for both instructors and students, such as sound quality, challenges with screen sharing, or challenges joining the session. And this disruption can be extremely frustrating and impede meaningful teaching and learning. Translating lectures online this way, we lose some of its strengths, and we don't really embrace any of the opportunities that the online environment can provide. It makes integration of student interaction with you or the material difficult. And especially with large classes, issues of capacity and bandwidth may occur. If you decide to take this route, I've broken down software options to ones integrated within your LMS and those outside of your LMS. For the integrated tools, this could provide consistency for students and instructors, which may facilitate institutional support. However, configuration of settings are likely different across platforms, so it could take some exploration to tailor for your specific conditions. These may potentially have a higher risk of bandwidth limitations. Outside programs, such as Zoom, may be easier for individuals to join anywhere, on any device, with little or no setup. There's also lots of openly available information for setup and problem solving. But an outside program would then require extra effort to archive recordings in your LMS. Lecture materials can also be delivered through pre-recorded videos. This would, in most circumstances, be my recommendation. It may initially seem like a time-intensive approach, but you can cover the teaching points with shorter total time of recorded materials. If you review the key learning objectives and chunk the material into multiple 5 to 20-minute lessons, it is pedagogically preferable to an hour-long webinar lecture. Another important strength of this approach is it allows students to progress at their own pace, whether that's due to constraints of travel or access, or due to the complexity of the materials. It gives students the option to review the materials whenever they can and as often as they like. The shorter presentations also make it easier to navigate the materials for review. It facilitates sharing and reuse across courses or sections of the same course. It may also enable greater student engagement with the content, as you can direct them to read written materials and ponder a question before watching a lesson, answer questions after reviewing the lesson, and then continue on to the next one. The challenges of this approach is it may involve a learning curve associated with using a new tool. And often we have higher expectations of ourselves when we see and hear ourselves in recordings than when we deliver a live talk. It also may require rethinking your schedule and plan for covering your course content. Moreover, it may involve additional steps for saving and uploading the recorded lessons. For pre-recording lessons, the best from a final product perspective is to use a screen capture software. Camtasia is one of the gold standard examples with exceptional capabilities. You can get a free trial, but it's otherwise quite expensive. Screencast-O-Matic is relatively user-friendly, still with some functionality for those who want to play with their recordings, and is available for a relatively small fee. These software make it easier to do short lessons, enable editing, but then also come with extra time for saving and sharing. Another option is to pre-record lessons in the same meeting software that were presented as options for live lectures. Again, the main benefits of these are consistency and potentially their integration in your LMS. For some courses that don't have much traditional didactic delivery of content, you may not try to translate the lecture time at all. Instead, students could be guided through curated materials from various sources. For example, your course textbook may have useful ancillary resources, such as videos and self-test questions. Instructors can use their expertise instead to guide this process and curate the materials through careful identification, organization, and appropriate questions and activities focused on the learning objectives. With this approach, we are not reinventing the wheel. We can provide flexibility of pace for the learner, again, facilitating the sharing and reuse of materials. We can also encourage students to contribute to the collection of resources. This approach can make it challenging to stick to the existing objectives and timelines while presenting a coherent course package. There's likely also greater variability in quality and reliability. And while you could create a wonderful course this way, it would likely be a time-intensive endeavor, depending on your existing collation and connection to existing materials. A major challenge with online courses is keeping students engaged and confident that they can get answers to their questions. I would suggest creating multiple opportunities for discussion, and these can be quite time intensive, so I would suggest identifying early where teaching assistants can support these avenues or where the workload can be shared across instructors where there are multiple sections of a course. Discussion boards are important for identifying challenges in real time. I like to create both open discussion boards for broad topics, such as technical problems, but also more specific categories, such as discussion boards for each assignment or lab. Synchronous video discussion groups can be a great way for building or maintaining community and providing interactive feedback. Different approaches are helpful depending on the size of the group. For example, for larger groups, it's helpful to have an additional facilitator who can respond to technical challenges using the chat feature, but also who can collate questions that arise via text. For smaller groups, it can be desirable to have students take turns providing a summary and facilitating the discussions. It may also be desirable to have virtual drop-in office hours that can provide students with a time when they know they can get a question answered, instead of perhaps watching the discussion board for the instructor to reply. Depending on the size of the group, this could be done through a web conferencing platform, or perhaps starting with a live text chat and move to a web conferencing platform as students enter the session or as appropriate based on the discussions. There is likely a lot of uncertainty around evaluations. Important to determining next steps is your context. Are there restrictions or required processes for changing the mark breakdown mid-course? Are there considerations in regards to accreditation, or are there institutional regulations regarding privacy that could impact the use of external applications? The quiz and test applications integrated into most LMSs have many features and make assignment submission and feedback quite seamless. Assessments serve as an important strategy in online courses for promoting engagement and ensuring students don't get left behind, and also address the increased risk of cheating in a fully online environment. Especially where final in-class exams are being canceled, it may be beneficial to consider expanding the number and type of evaluation components. For example, adding additional quizzes, providing grades for participation in the different components, for example, discussion boards, live discussion groups, designing a group assignment, which can give students an opportunity to work together in a time where they may be feeling isolated. Students can also be assigned to facilitate the different discussion forums and can be evaluated for this contribution. To address the concern of cheating, there is no fail-safe method in LMSs, but the quiz applications have some functions that make it more difficult. For example, time restrictions for tests and quizzes, where everyone needs to take them at the same time, and randomly selecting questions so not all students are getting the same questions or response options. So what might this look like for an actual course? For example, in an introductory microelectronics course, you might have 300 students, 2 instructors, and a group of teaching assistants. Each week, there are usually 3 one-hour lectures and 1 one-hour tutorial, plus a 3-hour lab every other week. This could be transitioned to a continuous discussion board for the week, facilitated by TAs, and then for each usual lecture, an instructor could post a written note with a summary of the objectives, the focus of the recorded lessons, required readings, and assigned questions, with direction on the ideal order to move through them. The lecture content could then be chunked into, for example, 2 15-minute pre-recorded lessons. Students would be directed to ask any questions about the material on the discussion board. The 2 instructors could share the load of creating these recorded lessons. During the 3rd lecture hour, ensuring availability of students and instructors each week, you could run a live instructor-led tutorial. I would suggest with a big group, the instructors start with a summary and follow up on any outstanding or common issues that arose on the discussion board, followed by a question and answer period. And again, for a large group, you may wish to direct all questions to the chat function and have additional facilitator, such as a TA, collate and read these aloud to the instructor. The scheduled time for the tutorials could be used for a live TA-led tutorial, potentially where the TA takes up a practice question live and responds to questions. Again, depending on size, it may be desirable to have 2 TAs run these to help organize the flow of questions and address technical issues that may arise. For a second course in microelectronics, say with 15 students and 1 instructor, possibly with a teaching assistant, but the same schedule, you could similarly use the discussion board, perhaps having student facilitators if there's no TA support. But instead of using pre-recorded lessons, you may choose to deliver very similar lectures, but live through a web conferencing platform. These could be recorded so students who had technical challenges or weren't able to join can view at a later time. I would recommend setting the expectations that students join with their video in a small group such as this to increase engagement. The tutorial could be held in a similar fashion. It would be beneficial, however, to add assessment opportunities such as weekly quizzes, ideally within your LMS, student facilitation duties, etc. There's so much diversity to laboratory setups that it's difficult to make recommendations for replacing them in an online environment. In many cases, there are excellent videos available online, training materials, and simulations that students could be directed to view. In some cases, live streaming demonstrations of the lab could be an option. For others, they may be existing software for virtual labs available, and there may be ancillary resources accompanying your textbook. Important to complement these resources will be evaluation metrics, quiz questions, individual or group assignments, discussion board forums, etc., which will be important to encourage students to engage more thoroughly with these replacement materials and focus on the key lessons of the laboratory experience. The first 2 examples were engineering-based, which may be very different than courses in other fields. So I have one more example of an insect ecology undergrad course that also has 15 students, has 1 instructor, and no TAs. Each week, they have 3 one-hour classes, which are used for a mix of lecture, discussion, and software workshopping. I would suggest for this course, rethinking the 3 lectures as a week's experience and setting the stage with a post that covers the expectations and components of the week's activities. The lecture material could be covered in perhaps 2 20-minute pre-recorded videos. Perhaps the software component could be facilitated through the review of external videos or instructional materials. Small group discussions could occur live during the second scheduled hour of the week or asynchronously on a group-specific discussion board. And a small assignment, perhaps software-related, and quiz questions may be integrated to contribute to the grades no longer allocated to the final exam. Students could also be assigned to take turns facilitating the discussion board as an assessment activity. The final scheduled hour in the week could be used for a live instructor-led tutorial. The student facilitator could be asked to present a summary of the discussion that occurred throughout the week on the discussion board. I realize that everyone's circumstance is different, but hopefully those examples will give you ideas on how you can proceed. Here are a few common challenges to keep in mind for online learning that we may expect to arise in our current situation. From a student perspective, students may not feel engaged. They may struggle with technology, both within and beyond their control. Their expectations may not always align with the instructors, and they may also not understand expectations of the instructor. And lastly, students often struggle more with time management when they don't have a set schedule to get out of bed and physically be somewhere. From an instructor perspective, technology is also often challenging, even with tech-savvy individuals. And without the real-time feedback of who is and isn't present, and who and how many people are falling asleep, it can be harder to gauge the comprehension and engagement of students, making it easier for students to fall through the cracks. It's also more time-intensive than we may expect. And while being an excellent dynamic instructor can go a long way to creating a strong in-class course, attention to detail is required for creating a robust online course. In summary, here are a few tips and strategies to help you make this transition as smooth as possible. It can be freeing to think outside of the traditional 1-hour lecture box. For example, thinking about the objectives of entire weeks and breaking lectures into smaller chunks. Even if you have experience using a software or platform, changing even the slightest thing in your setup can create unexpected challenges. So I encourage you to practice with the tools in the exact setup you are going to use. Set up clear expectations early and remind students through different communication channels. For example, how frequently will a TA or instructor be online? What are your expectations for student participation? Is everyone expected to post on the discussion board? Are they expected to attend all live sessions, or is it equally acceptable to watch recorded sessions? I like to create a help discussion board, and I direct all non-content related questions to that forum. If I receive an email with a question that isn't personal, I'll tell the student I'll post it and my response on the discussion board. I also encourage students to reply to their peers, which often gets them their answer the quickest. If your course has TA support, it may be helpful to have a process in which they can track student engagement and identify students who are struggling, possibly reaching out to them directly. Lastly, it may be helpful to explore the options for notifications in your LMS. Do you want to have the internal messages forwarded to your primary email account? Consider having people assigned to moderating different discussion boards and potentially having alerts sent for critical topics such as your help forum. Thinking back to your self-reflection, if you are approaching this as an opportunity, here are some bells and whistles you may want to consider. My absolute favorite is a weekly video. This could be a short 2-minute informal video recorded with your webcam. This can be used to recap last week, set the stage for the week to come, or perhaps highlight the course activities and expectations. But most importantly, these videos can be really helpful for connecting with students, which may be extra important in the current context. The LMS environment makes it easier to embrace the opportunity to integrate pre- and post-quizzing to facilitate learning and active engagement in your material. Your LMS environment can also allow you to get students to contribute resources to enrich the course. There are so many great references and videos online that you may never have seen, but can really help the students. Lastly, it can be extremely time-consuming to write responses and the guiding materials in your online courses. So using audio feedback can be a nice change for both instructors and students. However you are feeling now, remember, there's lots of resources out there and lots of people in the same situation with ideas and tools. So I encourage you to take care and to work together. Good luck.